Hello, and welcome to eMarketer's webinar, The Future of Digital Identity. I'm Nicole Perrin, Executive Editor at eMarketer, and before we start, I'd like to thank Newstar for making today's webinar possible, and Citrix Online for providing the platform. We're going to be covering a lot of information today, but don't worry about taking notes and possibly missing something. Tomorrow we'll email you with a link to view the slides and full recording. If you've got questions during the webinar, please send them our way. We'll have a Q&A session after the main presentation. You can also participate by tweeting. The webinar hashtag is EMWebinar, and that's at the bottom of many of our slides. Conducting today's webinar is analyst Brian Yeager. His recent reports have included the mobile wallet, 6 things marketers should know, digital identity, how tomorrow's connected life could help solve today's fragmentation issues, and the U.S. Financial Services Industry 2015, digital ad spending forecasts and trends. And now I'd like to introduce Brian Yeager.
Great. Thanks, Nicole, and thanks to everyone for joining today's webinar about the future of digital identity. As we increasingly live our lives interacting and transacting across an assortment of screens, digital identity is becoming more important, but also more unwieldy. Consumers have dozens of digital accounts, usernames, and passwords to keep track of. Companies selling products and services online constantly have to worry about fraudulent orders from stolen card numbers. And marketers face the difficult task of attempting to stitch together identity fragments of users across devices for everything from targeting through attribution. Emerging technologies like biometrics, wearables, and the Internet of Things have the potential to bridge the gap between physical and digital identity, while also removing friction from and adding better context to digital experiences. Today I'm going to provide some perspectives on the current digital identity landscape, as well as what the future of digital identity might look like. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to be highlighting some research and examples about identity that are relevant to the world of digital commerce, and others that are more applicable to digital marketers and advertisers. In your role, you may only focus on one of these areas, but it's important to remember that they're both wrapped together as part of the digital world we create and experience, and will be ever more closely connected moving forward. So to fully understand how the future of digital identity may one day function, it's important to investigate the current lay of the land. So in the first half of this webinar, we'll examine some current barriers and catalysts that help set up our perspective on the future of digital identity. 2 decades into an internet era in which digital identity was established on a site-by-site basis, guided by rules that vary from place to place and based on responses relying on users' whims and preferences, the ID landscape has evolved into a messy and fragmented array of email addresses, usernames, passwords, social profiles, payment credentials, mobile data, cookies, pixels, third-party data stores, and more. And worse, a lot of this is full of half-truths. Due to the self-assertion involved with most online accounts and the guesswork that analytics and targeting tools must do to fill in data gaps, digital identity is also prone to containing misleading or outright false information. Internet users today have a broad digital footprint spread across many different types of sites and services, which means that their relationship with identity exists in a variety of different contexts. March 2015 research from the mobile identity provider Telesign found that on average, U.S. Internet users hold more than 23 different online accounts. That includes an average of 3.5 online shopping accounts, such as Amazon, Etsy, or Walmart, 3.1 financial accounts, including online banking, investing, and digital wallets like PayPal, 2.8 email accounts, including web services like Gmail, and 2.7 entertainment accounts like Netflix, Pandora, or YouTube. The current situation with digital identity creates 3 primary challenges that consumers and companies are dealing with today. The first challenge is balancing value versus risk when it comes to providing as well as requesting digital identity data. As I'll cover a bit later, consumers report growing more hesitant to provide their personal information to access digital services, though hard incentives like discounts or soft incentives like a more relevant experience can change those behaviors. The second challenge is establishing trust in a world where most forms of digital identity are self-asserted by consumers. Some social networks require the use of real names to establish accounts. And this self-asserted nature of such information may be okay for some digital interactions, but for something like a financial transaction, other factors may be needed to establish trust, to establish that the user is who they say they are. And the third challenge is that scattershot signals and identifiers across the digital ecosystem means that marketers and advertisers continue to face challenges in trying to provide more relevance and context to their target audiences. Now going back to the challenge of value versus risk for a minute, it's important to note that digital identity is a double-edged sword. It enables communication and commerce on a global scale, it helps with business efficiency, and it brings value to consumers. But it also creates risks. Data breaches, identity theft, fraud, and other crimes are easier to perpetrate thanks to the digitization of identity. According to data from Javelin Strategy and Research, sponsored by the identity theft protection company LifeLock, there have been at least 10 million consumer victims of identity fraud in the U.S. since the year 2007. And though the number of victims and losses due to fraud have decreased from their peak in 2009, Javelin nonetheless estimated that there were 12.7 million victims of fraud in the U.S. last year, leading to total losses of $16 billion. Unfortunately, identity theft is something that many people in the U.S. have experienced over the past decade, most commonly associated with major breaches of credit and debit card numbers. From 2003 through 2014, a number of high-profile, large-scale data breaches occurred in the retail sector, ranging from e-commerce providers like eBay to brick-and-mortar stores like TJ Maxx and Target. And that's not including more recent data breaches of even more sensitive information from the healthcare company Anthem, Chase Bank, and the U.S. government's own Office of Personnel Management. A September 2014 survey by the payment service provider Avangate found that close to half of U.S. Internet users had to replace a credit card due to lost or compromised accounts once or twice within the past 5 years, and another 1 in 10 had to replace a card at least 3 times within that same period. And in addition, a separate study from Telesign found that 2 in 5 U.S. Internet users had received some type of notice about personal information being compromised, ranging from usernames and passwords to more serious information like social security numbers and insurance data. According to Kimberly Little Sutherland, the Senior Manager of Identity Management Strategy at LexisNexis Risk Solutions, the growing prevalence of these types of incidents mean that consumers are increasingly sensitive to identity fraud. She explains that if a user is creating an account, filling out an application online, or making a purchase, they're conditioned to stop if they feel like something's amiss. But they also don't have the patience for a long application or a long checkout process. And that's sort of the catch-22 that many companies are dealing with today, according to Little Sutherland. Consumers want convenience and they want ease of use, but they also want privacy and security baked in. Considering just how many people have had a run-in with the loss of personal data, it's not that surprising that data security is a top factor that influences the willingness of Internet users to share their personal information with companies, per SAS research from September of last year. But for how much concern over security and privacy that respondents report, it is noteworthy that the second most influential factor that entices the sharing of personal data is getting benefits like discounts or free merchandise. And this study is just but one example of the complicated, conflicting views that Internet users report about privacy, security, identity, and convenience. Respondents to surveys frequently cite their desire for more or better control over their digital identity. Almost 3/4 of U.S. Internet users told Pew Research Center that they believed it's very important to be in control of who can get personal information about them. And in the same survey, 65% believe it's very important to control what information is being collected, which could include anything from age and gender to personal preferences and behaviors. And in a separate Pew study from September of last year, half of respondents reported that they feel they have not much or even no control over all the collection of their personal information. With specific regard to marketing data, a March 2015 survey by the University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg School for Communication found a strong desire among Internet users for wanting control over what marketers can learn about them online. Along with that desire was a resignation among some in accepting that they have little control over what marketers can learn about them. Now, this finding suggests that there's an imbalance in the value exchange that occurs among consumers, digital services, and the marketers and advertisers that support them. But what consumers report on surveys about their beliefs related to privacy and control often don't match their actual behaviors. Consumers also believe there are times when the value exchange of their identity data with marketers is actually warranted. Like I talked about before, hard incentives like promotions, coupons, discounts, and even product suggestions were by a long shot cited as the top reason why Internet users shared data with companies, per May 2015 research conducted by the Altimeter Group. Softer incentives like information that can help make decisions and information that helps troubleshoot or provide access to support are their top reasons that prompt users to share data with companies. For these use cases, communicating in a transparent way the circumstances for data collection and utilization can go a long way in making users comfortable with providing personal information to help improve their experiences. And it's also worth taking a look at adoption trends as it relates to consumers and their views on privacy. Despite reported concerns about privacy and security, adoption of digital and mobile technologies continues at a rampant rate. By 2019, eMarketer estimates that 71.4% of the U.S. population will use smartphones. That's 196 million more smartphone users than there were in 2009. Close to half the U.S. population is already on Facebook, and by the end of 2019, 51.8%, or 172 million people, will be users of the social network in the U.S. During that same time frame, 7 in 10 people in the U.S. will make at least one purchase via any digital channel during the calendar year, equating to 195 million digital buyers by 2019. And those buyers will generate over $500 billion in U.S. retail e-commerce sales by 2019, based on eMarketer's projections. E-commerce sales will then account for 8.8% of total retail sales in the U.S. A growing proportion of e-commerce sales will come from mobile devices. By the end of this year, 22% of digital revenues will fall in the m-commerce category, rising to 27.5% in 2019. And perhaps most strikingly, tens of millions of U.S. adults are accessing the details of their most sensitive financial accounts via smartphones and tablets, including their bank accounts, their credit cards, and their investment portfolios. According to the latest eMarketer stats, just 9.8% of U.S. adults used mobile banking in 2010, but the number of users will exceed 100 million by the end of this year and reach 131.4 million, or more than half of U.S. adults by 2019. So one would think that with all the concerns on surveys about the desire for control of personal information, something like mobile banking adoption would be relatively low. But the draw of convenience and the value of a feature like making a check deposit by taking a smartphone picture has been enough to attract a significant base of users that want real-time access to their financial information literally at their fingertips. Keir Breitenfeld, the Vice President of Product Strategy for the Fraud and ID Division at Experian Decision Analytics, underscored how consumer behavior diverges from their reported beliefs. He said, the consumer ultimately wants to do as little work as possible to take some of the control into their own hands. He further described the challenge of trying to balance the need for user input with guesswork on the back end that gives users an optimal experience with security and control factored in. This balance is particularly relevant to digital commerce. According to PayPal's VP of Global Consumer Products, Carrie Kalaha, one of the biggest challenges that business owners have when they sell an item online is to trust that the person who wants to buy is who they say they are. Pieces of identity like payment credentials, addresses, and transaction histories all play an important role in building that trust. And the more trust there is between the buyer and the seller, the more seamless the experience can become. That's always been a challenge for e-commerce companies, according to Brett McDowell, the executive director of the FIDO Alliance, which is a consortium of service providers, hardware manufacturers, and software companies trying to create a standardized, simpler, strong authentication process. He described the phenomenon that occurs between a company's security team and product team battling over the balance between fewer clicks and keeping fraudsters at bay. Do you risk losing more revenue to fraud or to low conversion rates because of user friction? Security teams want to add more layers of protection for a reason. Online purchases are viewed as among the riskiest types of payments to accept, according to US IT professionals, and the burgeoning area of mobile payments wasn't far behind. And though it's true that user friction frequently results in cart abandonment and lost revenue opportunities, the bulk of e-commerce companies also report dealing with some level of fraud. About 1/3 of U.S. companies in a December 2014 study reported losing between 1% and 5% of their e-commerce revenues to fraud, and slightly more than 1 in 10 respondents saw between 36% and 50% of their revenues eaten up by fraud. Now, there are steps being taken to reduce the reliance on what's called a bare token, which allows one to use a password for someone else's account if it's uncovered, or a credit card number if it's stolen. One way to address this issue is by removing an actual card or account number from the transaction process, and instead use a one-time, randomly generated set of characters to act as a token or proxy for each individual transaction. This process is called tokenization, and if a payment data breach were to occur with tokenized credentials, they would be useless to a would-be fraudster. So if what happened to Target and their credentials that they had were tokenized, those fraudsters would not be able to use them at another retailer. Other approaches that rely on big data analytics are also being used to put up roadblocks during a transaction when something amiss is detected. So in other words, the more red flags that are signaled from a user during a transaction process, whether it be coming from an unusual location or unfamiliar browsing behavior, the more prompts for additional information will be presented to the user for further vetting. Now, as it relates to marketers, they have specific challenges they face with digital identity in today's multi-screen, nonlinear world we live in. It's not unusual for a consumer to own multiple devices, including smartphones, laptops, tablets, PCs, and more. And though the consumer is the owner of all devices, marketers continue to face challenges in tying that singular identity and its associated behaviors together across individual devices. They often see 4 different digital identities of the same person, except those identities are each specific device. Or if an individual shares their laptop or tablet with a member of their family, the identity relationship is thrown another curveball. And consumer actions that work to mask their identity footprint from tools that marketers and advertisers use for tracking and targeting also create identity gaps. According to Pew's data from September of last year, 59% of US internet users have cleared cookies and history from their browsers in the past. And the same study found that 57% had refused to provide information that wasn't relevant to the related transaction they were performing. Furthermore, 46% of worldwide internet users recently reported using a private browsing window that leaves no trace of their browsing session in the past month. Challenges that marketers face with merging profile fragments and collecting data across channels result from these identity gaps created by a more mobile world and a segment of users that are trying to take more control into their own hands of their information. And so as a result, new methods are being applied to get a more complete picture of digital identity. One approach was described by Neustar's Vice President of Marketing Services, Michael Schoen, and it's dubbed the cross-device graph, which enables marketers to link cookies and devices together to track where a consumer may be exposed to a mobile ad campaign and subsequent desirable actions that they might make on their desktop to really understand how it all works together. And though this concept works in a purely digital environment, bridging the offline-online gap in terms of attributing digital activity to something like brick-and-mortar sales remains an issue that's currently being worked on by a lot of providers, and a lot of solutions are coming to market that can help solve for that. Another approach is the use of social logins, which mobile apps and digital services employ to make registration and sign-in experiences as seamless as possible by letting visitors use their existing social media accounts from the likes of Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Google, and others. So if a user is already signed in to the selected social account, the experience is typically faster than registering from scratch or signing in with an account specific to that service. Many popular apps like the one shown on screen use social logins to make logging in as close to a one-tap experience as possible. And many of these services also ask to share details included in social accounts to personalize that experience. In one example, when National Football League fans create accounts on the NFL's website via their Facebook login, their favorite team can be quickly ascertained and the league's site tailored to that preference. And in another example, KLM Royal Dutch Airlines uses social login data to personalize the flight experience via its Meet and Seat feature, where if a ticket buyer authenticates through Facebook or Twitter, they can be matched with passengers that share that common interest, and they can actually sit next to each other on their flight. As one might expect, Facebook is by far the most popular social network used for social logins, and this is according to data from Gigya, which offers a platform for third-party logins and identity management. And Facebook was also the most popular for e-commerce sites when we're looking at different verticals. But despite Facebook's dominance, it's not the only social network people are using to log into other apps or services. In one example, Twitter was used the most as a social login in the media category, and Google Plus was used the most as a social login for travel sites. Users report using social logins because they don't want to spend time filling out registration forms, they don't want to create and remember usernames and passwords, and they like being able to use the same identity on all devices and websites. So in other words, convenience is the prevailing factor that makes social logins popular. So we've just talked a lot about the current state of digital identity, and that sets us up for talking about the future of digital identity and what that might look like. And so to get a glimpse of what digital identity might look like in the future, Really, you don't have to look any further than Walt Disney World. In 2011, Disney embarked on a nearly billion-dollar effort to revamp its theme parks, seeking to infuse them with technology that would make them even more magical. In 2014, after several years of testing, the company fully rolled out its My Magic Plus program at Disney World, with the Magic Band wearable device as the cornerstone enabler of that experience. The Magic Band is a band that's worn on the wrist and can be adjusted for size, as well as decorated with accessories like the ones shown on screen. It contains a short-range radio frequency identification, or RFID antenna, for quick, contactless transactions, and a long-range antenna for tracking wearers throughout the park. After receiving and setting up their Magic Bands before their scheduled trip, guests can use the wearable to open their hotel door, gain admission into theme parks, reserve rides, pay for goods throughout Disney World, experience interactive storytelling at attractions, engage with characters, and much more. And so what's the result? Friction is reduced across many interaction points, giving guests a better overall experience and helping Disney operate their parks and resorts more efficiently. An April 2015 article from Fast Company reported that 10 million people had tried Magic Bands since their launch. According to the article, the benefits were very impressive. Turnstile transaction time was reduced by 30%, 5,000 more people are able to experience the park at the same time, and the program reported a satisfaction rate in the 70% range. Now, admittedly, the My Magic Plus program works as well as it does because it's operating in a highly controlled environment, and individuals are using it for a limited time. But because it works so well, it sets a new bar of expectation among consumers that other companies will undoubtedly have to meet in the future. In the real world, with a messy status quo, mobile increasingly looks like the convergence point that will help people consolidate and get control of their digital identity. But it won't just be smartphones and tablets that will be part of the next generation of digital identity. A combination of emerging technologies may all work in concert together to create and communicate a persistent, secure, authenticated digital identity that can be used to more easily access an array of services, as well as receive more useful, contextual experiences of engagement. These technologies include biometrics, which uses the capture and digitization of unique physical attributes like fingerprints for the purposes of authenticating identity. It includes wearable devices, which range from smartwatches like the Apple Watch to eyewear like Google Glass, and many other types of computers that can be worn on the body. And it also includes the Internet of Things, which is a term used to describe the growing amount of objects that have sensors and can be connected to the Internet, often without screens. It's worth exploring the potential real-world future scenario involving these technologies to better understand how they work together, what role digital identity plays, and how digital commerce companies, marketers, and advertisers might be affected in the future. One might use their fingerprint or another physical trait to authenticate their identity with their wearable. That wearable, such as a smartwatch, might act as a sort of remote control for various connected systems. It can serve as a way to unlock, control, and personalize your car. And when your spouse uses his or her smartwatch to access your car, it may adapt to their seat settings, put their planned destination into the GPS, and start playing their favorite music playlist after turning on the car. It could also do the same for your home and provide a common identity and a set of preferences across your smart refrigerator, your lighting system, your TV, and other connected appliances. And the smartwatch will likely be tied into your digital wallet to be able to make a seamless, secure transactions across all these different platforms. But what's interesting is that communicating identity isn't just a capability of the smartwatch. Secure protocols are currently being developed for device-to-device communication so that when your authenticated car enters your garage after work, it communicates with your home to perform a series of actions, such as starting the oven or turning on the television. And with each object that's also tied to a digital wallet, device-to-device transactions can be made. For instance, instead of having a separate transponder for EasyPass like what exists today, the ability to pay for tolls may be built right into the car and could also work for automatically buying time at a parking meter or in a parking garage. The same might be true for the home. A smart fridge could automatically reorder milk, butter, and eggs from FreshDirect or Instacart when they run low, or place orders based on recipes selected to be made throughout the week. The wearable acts as the notification hub. When any of these actions is performed, the user is made aware of it and has the ability to make modifications or cancellations if necessary. And the data associated with these activities is also collected, safely, securely, and with permission, by companies on the back end for everything from processing those orders and improving products to feeding back into the marketing and advertising campaigns that one day may appear on the screens of cars, on smart fridges, or even in your field of vision in your connected contact lenses. To make this scenario a reality outside the carefully curated walls of Walt Disney World, physical traits need to be blended with digital signals to establish a unique digital identity, according to Jonathan Schlur, the chief scientist at ad management platform provider Seismic. He believes that something like a wearable could tap into characteristics close to the person for authentication when they interact with all the different platforms I just talked about, a car, other types of mobile devices, your home, or other types of platforms. And there are several physical traits that can be used for biometric authentication because they have characteristics that don't frequently change over time. They're distinctive to individuals even in a large population. They can be easily measured across that population, and people are ultimately willing to use that trait for the purposes of authentication. The most common biometric method is fingerprint scanning, a feature that is increasingly found in smartphones and used in place of a PIN code to unlock a device or even for authenticating a mobile transaction. A user registers their fingerprint via a special sensor on the device during setup, and when they're prompted, they simply tap their registered finger on the sensor to gain access to the protected screen or service they're trying to get at. Voice recognition, where users make a voice print that is matched during each subsequent access attempt, is sometimes used for easier access to telephone-based services, though it's also making its way into mobile apps, especially in the financial sector. Facial recognition can be used to overtly by taking what is essentially a selfie and having it compared to some type of master on file. But the technology can also be used in a covert manner, which you're probably most familiar with when you upload a picture to Facebook and they use their automatic photo tagging feature to be able to tag photos of people you know without you performing those actions. Vein recognition uses cutting-edge imaging technologies to detect the unique pattern of veins in one's hand or finger, and is used in higher security environments like ATMs to authenticate large value transactions. Iris recognition and retinal scanning are oft-used examples in biometrics when featured in futuristic film and television. And though there are companies trying to bring the technology to the masses for more secure authentication, this type of scanning is primarily used for high-security government and military applications. One's heartbeat creates a unique cardiac rhythm signature that's currently being tested as a way to authenticate identity as well. A smartwatch with the right sensors or even a dedicated wearable worn for authentication could capture those heartbeat signals and use them as a way to prove and communicate digital identity. And finally, DNA is the most complex, most unique set of data about oneself that could theoretically be used for authentication, especially as sequencing becomes more affordable and platforms are built to support such types of digital identity. But right now, DNA processing still takes too much time to put into practice for most applications. As for consumer adoption of biometrics for signing into sites and apps, 4 in 10 U.S. Internet users in research from Gigya said they were comfortable performing such an action. 1/4 said they were totally opposed to the idea, and 1/3 weren't quite sure how they felt about it. So it's a good start, but many consumers still have to be won over for the wider scale use of biometrics. Now, moving on to wearables, as a broad class of devices, wearables have yet to be adopted en masse by consumers. Among smartphone owners that aren't likely to purchase a wearable device, fully 64% reported that they simply don't see a need to own one. There's no killer app yet, but making wearables a remote control for digital identity could give consumers a big reason to buy in. Wristwear is by far the most popular type of wearable being shipped worldwide, according to data from IDC, and the firm expects the category to dominate the wearables market over the next several years. A wearable-controlled future, reinforced with digital identity, already exists beyond the walls of Disney World in some respects. Apple Pay comes integrated with the Apple Watch for paying with the tap of the wrist at NFC-enabled merchants. And users that download an app can actually unlock their door at select Starwood hotels with their Apple Watch as well. Companies like Jawbone and Swatch have either launched or are planning to release wearables with integrated payment capabilities this year, with more hardware makers likely to follow suit. And another factor that will play a role in the future of digital identity is the Internet of Things. According to the Consumer Electronics Association, sales of connected home technologies in the U.S. is expected to reach close to $1 billion by the end of this year. IHS estimates that in 2020, 223 million connected smart home devices and appliances will be sold worldwide, up from just 1 million in 2014. And IDC estimates that worldwide sales of the expanding universe of Internet of Things devices and products will reach $1.7 trillion by 2020. Now, these are all lofty expectations, and if they come true, it also means that marketers and advertisers will be drowning in a whole new type and scale of data, which I'll talk about in a second. Now, as I mentioned, some of these more futuristic types of connected devices aren't that widely adopted yet. Just 7% of U.S. Internet users surveyed by the Altimeter Group owned wearables, and this is back in May 2015. 4% owned some type of connected appliance, and the same amount said they owned a connected car. And just 3% owned some type of home automation hub to tie all this stuff together. So where does consumer interest lie at the moment on the growing array of internet-connected products and where they might buy? Connected home cameras like DropCam and connected thermostats like Nest sparked the most interest among internet users in North America. Connected lighting, connected door locks, and a smart home hub rounded out the top 5, and this is per an April 2015 study from iControl Networks. Marketers believe that the Internet of Things will have a significant impact on how they operate. A November 2014 survey of CMOs and senior marketers worldwide by the Economist Intelligence Unit found that 51% believe the Internet of Things would have the biggest impact on their profession by 2020. And also of note is that just 13% were concerned about the future effect of any type of privacy backlash, which kind of goes back to some of the things we talked about around the consumer desire for privacy and how it doesn't quite mesh with their behaviors. Martin Gilliard, the general manager of the Americas for Experian-owned ad audience identification provider AdTruth, believes the Internet of Things brings a new dimension to the challenges that marketers have already been facing with mobile. He said that anything that was built to solve just for mobile devices is going to be different than what you have to use to solve for thermostats, or for cars, or even for wearables. He also said that the devices are going to create different signals from the customer. And he suggested that as a brand or technology company, you have to figure out, how do I ingest this information and find things that are meaningful enough in this to connect and understand who this consumer really is. Schlur from Seismic also described how the Internet of Things changes the nature of cross-screen identity for marketers and advertisers. He said, I think when you look a bit further out, cross-screen doesn't become cross-screen anymore. It's cross everywhere. Every system interacts with the user, especially if you think about the concept of the Internet of Things. And the challenge, according to Schlur and many others, will really be related to data management as consumers move from having between 5 and 10 personal devices to dozens or even hundreds. One potential solution could be a sort of persistent digital identity that could be established using a combination of smartphones, wearables, and other internet-connected objects, with it all tied back to biometrics and user behaviors, kind of like what I illustrated earlier. Now, moving on to Amazon's Dash Bus, and this is an early manifestation of how the Internet of Things might take hold. This recently launched, and this is what the company calls a Wi-Fi connected replenishment device that's branded based on the product that's being sold. When the button is pushed, a product is ordered. The buttons are set up via the Amazon mobile app, where the devices are connected to the home Wi-Fi network, and the products to order are specified, including their size and quantity where it's applicable. When the button is pressed, the mobile app sends out a push notification where the user can select to look at that order and delete it if the button was pressed by mistake. And the button also won't place another order until the current one gets delivered. And the reason why I bring this up is that Dash buttons leverage the digital identity established with Amazon, including payment information, addresses, past successful orders, and the Prime membership status. And these are all attributes of people that brands partnering with Amazon on this launch of the Dash button that they're really looking to reach. They want to reach these people that are loyal customers of Amazon. It'll certainly be worth watching to see if consumers willingly adopt the objects or if Amazon has to go back to the drawing board. But this is really just one test of many that we're going to see where brands are trying to get closer and closer to consumers in their home activities. And the Internet of Things is going to play an increasingly prominent role in trying to further those goals. But for capabilities like Amazon Dash to really take off, companies will have to communicate and demonstrate the value of this proliferation of internet-connected objects to drive consumer adoption at scale. As of December 2014, a large share of internet users polled in the US, Europe, and Japan weren't quite sold on the benefits of the Internet of Things when weighed against some of their privacy concerns. This is data from Trend Micro. It found that 42% of respondents thought the benefits of Internet of Things didn't outweigh their privacy concerns, and another 14% were unsure. And this really emphasizes the need for brands that are getting involved, companies that are getting involved, to not only communicate how these things work, but actually demonstrate them and show that there is value in consumers sharing some of their personal information to get a really type of seamless personalized experience. And so some key takeaways about kind of the current state and future of digital identity. Digital identity today, it's fragmented, it's messy, and there are challenges around balancing value versus risk in terms of the type of data that consumers are willing to share and the type of data that marketers collect. There's challenges around communicating trust, especially as it relates to digital commerce, and proving you are who you say you are in a transaction. And there's challenges around delivering relevance and context, especially for marketers that have all these identity gaps that they have to try and fill to be able to craft a really meaningful story for their audience. Some tactics like cross-device measurement and social logins are just a few ways that these issues are currently being addressed. And when we look into the future, and we look at digital identity of tomorrow, it could rely on a combination of mobile devices like smartphones and wearables, as well as biometrics and the Internet of Things to help converge and simplify today's kind of fragmented digital identity ecosystem. But just as I talked about at the end of this presentation, companies have to show consumers value to make this future a reality. They really have to prove that by buying into wearables and getting all these internet-connected objects, it makes their lives easier, and the personalization is really something that they're looking for. And so that's kind of our perspective on the future of digital identity. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole.
Thank you, Brian. We'll get started with our Q&A session in just a few minutes. But first, I'd like to once again thank Neustar and introduce Doug Feit, Executive Director of Solutions Engineering at Neustar. Doug's going to say a few words and then we'll get right to your questions. Doug?
Thank you, Nicole, Brian, and everyone at eMarketer for putting together today's session, and thank you to everyone on the webinar for joining us. As Brian alluded to earlier, we are living and marketing in the age of the empowered consumer. Customers and prospects demand that brands interact with them in relevant and impactful ways across an ever-evolving set of media channels and platforms. While this creates great opportunities for brands, it also furthers the chasm that exists between consumers' expectations and marketers' reality. Over 70% of consumers report that they will not respond to offers and messages unless the experience is relevant to them, while only 17% of marketers have the ability to tailor or personalize messages to individuals. The root cause to that gap is a lack of a consistent identity across disparate channels. We focused a lot of today's time on digital identity, but the reality is that the lack of identity applies across all marketing channels, both digital and non-digital. Three main factors make identification a challenge today. First, offline identity is a dynamic and scarce data set. Every year, 45 million consumers change their phone numbers, 16 million change their addresses or relocate homes, 2.1 million legally change their name. This means that on an annual basis, somewhere between 25 and 30% of every marketer's CRM records changes, and usually without the marketer knowing or that change being a publicly available data point. Second, the buyer journey continues to get more complex as new viable channels emerge as mainstays in every marketer's toolkit. This includes a lot of the things that Brian alluded to. Social, mobile, wearables, addressable TV, Internet of Things, all those new ways to interact with customers. Lines between those channels and the platforms that serve them are becoming more and more blurred every day. Third, and most importantly to marketers, it becomes difficult to connect interactions across these disparate channels to create consistent targeting strategies and to assess the impact that each interaction and channel has on the bottom line of conversions and revenue. At Neustar, we're helping marketers bridge the gap across these disparate channels with a persistent identity and set of analytical tools that can not only be applied to digital channels, but also bridge the gap to non-digital channels. These solutions allow marketers to build rich customer profiles for delivery of relevant experiences to consumers, and also analyze the impact and interplay of each interaction, again, across both digital and non-digital channels. Our approach to solving this issue is unique in the market in that we start with our authoritative offline identity and link that identity to the digital world and all of its disparate touchpoints. The result is an integrated marketing suite underpinned by a true offline identity instead of a digital proxy for identity created by behavioral signals or incomplete digital identities. Our suite of solutions includes modules that allow marketers to plan, target, and then measure their campaigns. Fundamentally, we're allowing marketers to apply the same analytical rigor and targeting techniques that they've been applying to offline channels for decades to the entire set of modern marketing channels. Thank you again for everyone's time today, and with that, I will hand it back to Nicole for Q&A.
Thanks, Doug. Let's move on to the Q&A. We've got a lot of good questions for you, Brian. So first, I kind of want to talk about the fragmentation of digital identity from a consumer perspective. You know, like a lot of issues for digital marketers, this is something that people deal with not only while they're at work, but at home. You know, you talked earlier about how many accounts the average consumer has, and certainly marketers are not immune to those statistics. So can you talk a little bit about what it might look like on the consumer side as marketers, merchants, and publishers start to develop better digital identity solutions, and they can finally really tell who you are across even our shared devices? Is this something that we should be looking forward to in the next few years, or is the vision still a little bit of a fantasy?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Nicole. You know, we talked a lot about kind of the consumer concerns around the control of information. I really think that's going to be a core part of it in terms of actually making this a reality. It's really going to be on the consumer's own terms. You can kind of create this infrastructure or ecosystem where a consumer can more seamlessly interact across all these channels, right? But it's it's really up to them to be able to adopt these tools. So I think you look at Facebook, right? And we talked about it with social logins. I mean, people are providing a lot of personal details. The NFL is using it to kind of personalize their experience, but you could take it a lot further than that in terms of Facebook really being the arbiter of digital identity or a number of different social networks that could be used. So I mean, that's that's kind of one touch point, and I mean some of the marketing that goes on there with Atlas and some of those types of things, the focus on real identities, or that type of messaging that's out there. That's something that seems to be resonating with people. But again, it's really up to the consumer to kind of buy in. That's why it's so important for companies that are coming up with these solutions to really communicate the value and get consumers comfortable with kind of putting in a little bit of their information to get something out of that, making sure that that value exchange is there. But it could be social networks. I think the mobile operating system, or the operating system in general, and how it connects across devices is going to be really important as well. You have companies like Google, for example, that are kind of doing their own initiatives to create Internet of Things operating systems. Apple has HomeKit, which is trying to tie all these different services or devices together as well. And so I think, whether it's social media or kind of the mobile platforms that we deal with, those are going to be two really important points where we see all this stuff kind of converge over the next few years.
Sure. So, along similar lines, one thing that you talked about was that wearables might be one solution to a lot of these digital identity problems, and here's somewhere else where it's really kind of up to consumers to act. How tough will it be to make progress on this front with consumers a little bit wary of the wearables category and not necessarily rushing out to buy these devices?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the classic chicken and egg problem where it's almost like the manufacturers of at least smartwatches. I mean, I think smartwatches have been kind of the, dubbed the sort of big thing as it relates to wearables. And, it seems like they're doing well, but there's still, kind of this lack of infrastructure around something like the smartwatch. So you have kind of pockets of really cool stuff, right? Where you have like the Starwood Hotel example, where, if you're tied into the loyalty program, you download their app and you can, use your phone to unlock their door automatically. And I think we'll see more and more of that. We could even see, again, we talked about the Disney World example, something like more theme parks just tying in with something like the Apple Watch or smartwatches. And so I think, as you see more and more of these types of applications that, they're not just kind of notification-based types of apps, but they tie into broader types of activities, I think then you'll start to see the light click among consumers and say, hey, there's something really useful to having this kind of, technology on my wrist, beyond kind of the health tracking applications that are out there today, or just receiving notifications. It's actually your key to unlock your car. It's your key to unlock your home and to make it all personalized for you. As some of those things come to fruition, I think that's really going to be the draw to consumers. But again, all this stuff actually has to come to market, and it has to be demonstrated as to how it might work together to really get consumers to buy in.
And then in turn, I think we've got a similar issue with the Internet of Things, right, in terms of chicken and egg and demonstrating the benefits. So how do you think that the future use of these digital identity tools might extend beyond what you just mentioned, the connected car, the connected home examples that you talked about earlier?
Right. I think, from a marketing and advertising perspective, I think one of the interesting kind of up-and-coming examples that I've heard about is like digital out-of-home, whether it be paid media or even when you're in the store, for example, kind of out-of-home media, being able to kind of take your identity information and get that personalized experience. Maybe it's a virtual dressing room, or it's some type of product information that might be in a store that is automatically custom tailored to you when you tap your wearable against it or something like that. I think that's where you'll start to see, again, not just kind of the home, the home automation types of examples, but actually seeing some of these examples in the real world, not just kind of the, again, paid advertising, but really helpful types of prompts to that to help personalize your shopping experience in the real world. I think there's been a lot of experiments that have gone on with trying to do that. As screen technology becomes cheaper, as more people, as imaging becomes more ubiquitous, and as more people adopt things like wearables, again, I go back to this demonstration thing, demonstrating how it works, demonstrating the benefits, being sure that you give consumers some control over that. I think that's where you might see more manifestations of digital identity being used and tying in Internet of Things, tying in wearables and things like that.
I feel like this is a really good place to mention some identity theft and security issues. Can you talk a little bit about how different demographic groups are responding to these problems?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes along the demographic line that you would expect. Generally, from an age perspective, older demographics are a little bit more averse. They're less in the early adopter category with a lot of this, and some of it's about education. I mean, some of that group just isn't as educated about some of the digital issues that are out there in terms of the things that you can do to protect your identity and to monitor your accounts and control that information. Whereas, people who are growing up with this technology, they kind of learn the caveats with it. They learn how to get more control of it, and so because they know how to use this technology and know how to control some of the information around it, they're just more willing to adopt it in general. We see this in countless surveys, whether you look at wearables or just mobile devices in general, some of the activities and adoption trends around that. It's typically the younger users. Now with something like mobile banking, for example, there are certain exceptions, right? So like with mobile banking, well, 18 to 24-year-olds, they're just coming out of college. Maybe they don't have, they might not have a bank account established yet. They might just be getting their first job. So what we generally see in if you dig down in our numbers is that they're not adopting something like mobile banking as readily as 25 to 34-year-olds. That's actually the largest group. And so, it does vary in terms of application to application, but the general trend is that, younger users, they're definitely they're definitely more willing because they understand some of the concerns that are out there and they know how to deal with them. They're a little bit more educated than maybe some older consumers.
Now, one thing people have been doing for years, of course, to help protect themselves and their privacy is deleting cookies, which has been a challenge for marketers for a long time. And you talked about that earlier, and also how they're not as effective on mobile. What are some other tools besides cookies that marketers are using to capture identity data?
Right. So I mean, there's a lot of different kind of tools in the toolbox there. A pretty prominent one is kind of there's ad identifiers that are present in something like iOS, Apple's iOS, or Google Android, where again the user has control to kind of reset those types of things, but that's kind of the way that a lot of mobile app publishers, for example, are trying to bridge that gap and trying to get information on, trying to get that identity information and tying back, again, that device with some other activities that they might have. If you're a publisher and you have first-party data on somebody, that's great information to have, and there are a lot of different efforts going on to be able to kind of tie together all that first-party data to be able to establish maybe an identity marketplace or something like that. And then obviously there's social networks, and this is the advantage of that somebody like a Facebook has, where they, if you log into Facebook via your mobile device or your desktop or your laptop or your tablet, that's a common identity, and so they can track all those behaviors across devices. And I mean, really, any first-party publisher can do these types of things, but the scale of Facebook is such that that's why it is such an attractive platform for digital marketers and advertisers right now, because it has kind of that rich layer of data, and they can kind of see across devices how people behave. So, and there's other tactics, right? There's device fingerprinting that goes on to be able to get like certain browser characteristics. Again, kind of what was described by Michael Schoen as kind of this cross-device graph, using cookies, but also tying them back to devices to actually make them a bit more stronger and not just standing on their own as kind of an individual piece of identity data. So there's a lot of different kind of tools and tactics that are out there. It'll be interesting to see what marketers do, again, to try and bridge that gap and fill in those fill in those holes when it comes to identity.
Right. So I think we only have time for one more question. If you could just talk for a little bit about what role marketing software is going to play in helping fill in the identity gaps.
Right, absolutely. So in terms of tracking all those cookies and those ad identifiers from mobile apps and things like that, I mean, the big trend now that we keep hearing about is the data management platform as kind of this centralized place to be able to store all that information and make these connections in terms of identity. And we see more marketers bringing, brands bringing those data management platforms in-house to be able to capture that data, to intermingle it with their own first-party data to get a better picture of who these users are, what these behaviors are. And so I think it's going to play, marketing software plays a really important role. The data management platform is kind of at the center of that, especially with third-party data. You have CRM data, first-party data that's kind of being connected with all of that. And then, again, you have the automation aspect of all this. So being able to have one-to-one conversations based on that identity data that you know at scale across maybe hundreds or thousands, even millions of consumers at the same time, or an audience at the same time, to be able to have kind of that individualized experience. Those are some of the things that marketers are working toward by implementing and integrating all this software together. Again, with data management platform kind of at the center of that, and making those interconnections, and then leveraging that, scaling it up, automating it and having those conversations across a variety of different channels.
Got it. Thanks. That's a lot of great information. And thanks to all of you listening. We're out of time, but feel free to continue the conversation on Twitter. Remember, we'll send you an email tomorrow with a link to view the slides and full recording. Thank you for joining us. And thanks again to Newstar for making this webinar possible.